Drop the Mic coming to you right after a fiery Mike of the Minifans. If you didn't watch it already, go check it out. Guest appearances by Turtle Boy, Steve Robinson, Kirk Minahan. Unbelievable. Jesus. Fired up, everyone. I'm sure you'll see the conclusion to that on tomorrow's podcast, Monday's return of the Kirk Minahan Show. Until then, I'm going to talk some comedy with you. And I don't mean to keep talking about this Fighter and the Kid podcast. Honestly, if you've watched this show the last few weeks, you would think I was a big fan of these guys or something. I think I've listened to one episode before all this shit happened. They did an episode with Bobby Lee a couple of years ago that was pretty good. And since that, I never had any interest in these guys. But now, every day, it's a fucking drama fest. So I guess the Fighter and the Kid does not exist in any form anymore. It's changing to the Fighter and the Wolf. Josh Wolf is replacing Brian Callen. And this is a decision by, I guess, Cast Media, who owns the podcast. I'm a little surprised they wouldn't just keep the name. Brian the Kid Callen is where the kid comes from, but I don't imagine he would have any legal right to that name. I would think they would want to keep it the Fighter and the Kid. Just now with Josh Wolf, maybe they did it out of respect to Callen. Seems like a strange move, though, because there's already people going to be turned away with the absence of Brian Callen. Now with the new name, there are even more people likely to stop giving a shit about it. And I don't know if Josh Wolf will contribute to that show or not, because like I said, I never listened to it. But it does seem like a show where you can't just plug in different personalities and it's going to be exactly the same. You know, I used the Caller Daddy example last week, I think. It doesn't seem like that. It seems like people listened for Callen and Schaub, and now they don't have that anymore. What they also don't have is a sufficient backup. The Fighter in the Rinks Patreon that started, that we told you about, still exists, but I'm sorry, Fighter in the Rinks, not The Fighter. I don't think legally they can do that. It's all a weird scenario. But
beloved Patreon subscribers, beloved, because I got to tell you, I can't thank you guys enough for signing up in those kinds of numbers. And I know you guys are looking for Fighter in the Rinks. Well, we're doing everything we can to bring that to you, but right now, due to forces that are beyond our control, that is not possible. So what we are going to do is we're going to try to bring you as many shows as much content on Patreon as we possibly can.
My understanding of this is that Brendan Schaub is not allowed to do this podcast. So I guess tip of the cap to Brendan Schaub for being a good friend, trying not to abandon his buddy when there's so much gray area. But very dumb move, I think, by them, and premature to just announce that they're going to do essentially the Fighter and the Kid on Patreon under the name The Fighter in the Rinks, and then not be able to do it. Because now you have Brian Callen announcing that, you know, due to circumstances outside of his control, they're going to, instead of having Brendan Schaub on, he's going to do something called the Callen Report, which is him talking about news, kind of ripping off the Robinson Report, if you ask me. And he's doing some conspiracy show with Sam Tripoli, which could be interesting, but it's not what people signed up for. So it kind of feels like, and I don't think this was their intent. Maybe it was. I think they just wanted to get the show up and running. But it feels like they scammed the first 5,000, or I think it's even higher than that now, 9,000 or something. The first few thousand subscribers that donated them $5 feels like they're getting ripped off a little bit. I get circumstances outside of their control. Maybe they should have figured that out before they announced they were going to do this Patreon podcast. So a lot of weird stuff. I think Brian Callen's career is done because it seems like even his friends, even the ones that want to, can't back him up. But that's very troubling. And I'll tell you why, because I think that Brian Callen, I think there's certainly a chance that he is guilty of what he's being accused of. I think there's a lot more evidence in that case, at least validity to the person's claims. Catherine Tigerman. But is it Kathleen or Catherine? I hope I'm getting that right. But the Tigerman story in the LA Times, which is Amy Kaufman, has a real axe to grind with Brian Callen, right off the bat, publishing Brian Callen loses his role on the Goldbergs. His talent agent has dropped him. Everyone's abandoning Brian Callen. And I point more to the Chris D'Elia thing. I wonder if Callen wishes he defended Chris D'Elia a little more and didn't immediately turn his back on him when D'Elia was going through shit, because where's the evidence on Chris D'Elia? A lot of people posted screenshots that seemed shady. And like I said, he very well may be a creep. In fact, the evidence would suggest he is. But there's no evidence of anything illegal necessarily. There's no criminal charges. I don't know why Chris D'Elia doesn't have a career anymore. Oh, because an article was published. And the reason that's dangerous, A, because it's the LA Times, which is supposed to be a valid news source, a reputable news source, but it's also dangerous because we now live in an era where I could write a blog. In theory, I could write a blog saying when I was at the Providence Comedy Connection last week, Shane Gillis molested me. And that could be, it could get some traction. And it could be considered a valid claim. So that's the world we live in now. And it seems like, I rant about it a lot, but it does seem dangerous. And it seems like people should be more concerned by it. So maybe Callen's getting a little bit of a taste of his own medicine when he sees people abandoning him, even though I don't necessarily think that it's right. And while the entire world of podcasting breaks down and seems to be on fire every day, we've been missing a good podcast war. This is one from kind of an obscure podcast. So if you guys are familiar, actually, Corinne Fisher was on a very popular podcast, Guys We Fucked. Kind of the original Call Her Daddy, and then they sort of changed the direction a little bit. But they got crazy numbers and then went to subscription service, and they're kind of one, probably because of Call Her Daddy. There's something that could replace them. Like I said, kind of the opposite of what I was talking about with Callen and Schaub. There's someone that could kind of fill that void, a new podcast. Guys We Fucked kind of went away. But this is none of this is to shit on Corinne Fisher. She found a new podcast. I believe she still does Guys We Fucked, by the way. But she found a new podcast with Joe Derosa called why am I forgetting the name? Without a Country. Jesus Christ. You'd think you'd prepare, Mike. Without a Country. Corinne Fisher and Joe Derosa do this podcast, which I actually think is a really good concept. So the idea of it is that, there's all this bullshit in the media. Yeah, MSNBC or CNN will publish stories way one way. Fox News will do it way the other. And you can use 10 million examples on both sides. And they take articles from each side and try to suss out the bullshit. So I would prefer, in an ideal world, I'd rather listen to a guy like Colin Quinn, who I think's more interested and more interesting on these topics. Do a podcast like this. I have no particular, I'm not necessarily a fan of Corinne Fisher. I think she's okay from what I've seen. Joe Derosa, I like. He actually blocked me on Twitter. I wish I could remember what that was for, but I wish he would unblock me because I do like Joe Derosa. But he's not one of my favorites or anything. I'm not a crazy Joe Derosa fan. So I've never been particularly invested in this podcast, although I do like the premise. I think it's a good premise, and there's there's potential for that to have a big audience these days when there's so much bullshit in the news. But the idea of the podcast is, all right, everyone's on extreme right or extreme left. We're going to suss out the bullshit. So if you go and listen, first of all, horrible theme song, by the way. It's Joe Derosa rapping it. I don't know if it's supposed to be intentionally bad, but a very bad theme song.
Gotta do our nails, gotta do our curls, gotta do these things, cause we're girls.
Gotta make a mess, gotta play with toys, gotta do this stuff, cause we're boys.
Again, I'm not a fan of the podcast, so maybe it goes over my head, the reference, but oof. If I was just turning that on randomly, it would be an automatic no thanks. But because I know these guys a little bit, I made it through the whole podcast. And this was a 2-hour episode where towards the end, they get into moderates Joe Biden and Kamala Harris being called moderates by some and extremists by others, and they particularly get into the abortion issue. It is a hot button issue for old Joe Derosa. Joe gets stirred up. Joe Derosa, I don't think he's a sexist. A lot of people throw that label on him. I don't think that's fair, but he definitely has some sort of issue with women, or when women's issue. Let me put it this way. This is a better way to say it. When women's issues get brought up, he gets very emotional and very passionate, and kind of sort of believes that the mainstream media goes a little too easy on feminist issues, and they don't get called out on their bullshit enough. So I think that's sort of where he stands. Corinne Fisher, a pretty staunch feminist. So you could say on this issue, that's going to be interesting. Some of Joe's issues may come from the fact that he was adopted, and he's obviously very passionate about an issue like abortion. Well, they seem to do anything in this podcast other than suss out the bullshit and get down to the real meat of the topic. This was an impassioned argument right from the start, and you see Derosa lose his fucking mind.
No.
Somebody.
Heartless was the wrong word. Like I'm saying.
Well, really?
No,
because that is the language that everybody in your position uses.
No. What? You're fucking. You want to be right, so you're making me say that a person.
No, I didn't make you say anything. You said what you said.
A person is heartless if they have no emotion in giving up the baby. Is what I am saying. That is what I am saying, Joe.
Okay.
And I stand by that.
Then, okay. And then somebody's heartless if they have no emotion about an abortion too. I mean, what the fuck?
I think
which
many,
is it?
I think
which
many
fucking,
people have.
Which is it, Corinne?
And that's
is it so sacred that it needs to be
What?
protected and loved at all costs, or is there not a connection to it?
You act like this is the thing. People who say
No, it's not
people are
who.
not just getting abortions willy fucking nilly.
Are you crazy?
People-
Every person I know that's ever gotten one, it was willy fucking nilly because they weren't careful. Every single person I know.
The decision to get the abortion. Are we talking about Plan B, or are we talking about actually
No, I'm
going?
talking about going in.
Actually going.
I'm talking about
getting
going
the thing,
in. I'm talking
and they
about
just,
going in.
You say, oh, they just went like it was a day at the
Hear
stop.
my words,
How
please,
many
right
people-
now.
How many people do you know who got abortions?
Please hear my words
handled
right
it
now.
Like that?
Several. And every single one of them, it was because they fucked up, they didn't act responsibly, and they had to get their ass out of a situation. So
That's
stop
why-
acting like
Yes.
that doesn't fucking exist.
That's why abortions happen, because you have to undo mistakes. What you are saying
I'm
is
talking
that
about
no one-
carelessness. I'm not talking about a mistake. I'm talking about fuck it, I don't care right now, and now shit, I got to deal with I got to deal with carelessness.
Carelessness is just like, just come in, we will handle it later. And
That's what I'm talking
and I'll
about.
Get an abortion.
That's what I'm talking about.
I don't think people are doing
well,
that.
I know people that have done it.
That they literally said,
I know people
let's
who
do
have
it
done
now.
it.
I'll get an
I
abortion.
know people who have done it. Yes, and I know people who have done it several
That
times.
literally doesn't even make sense, because if they were doing it, if they were having sex knowing they were going to get an abortion, they would have just taken Plan B.
Okay. Well, it
doesn't
didn't
make
exist
sense.
at the time, Corinne.
It doesn't make then so this was years ago.
Yeah.
And when Plan B didn't exist, I also don't think they just were like soberly like, I'm gonna get an abortion.
Well, they were, Corinne. What am I lying?
I don't know. It seems like it's a really
I'm telling you.
far-fetched story.
So let me get this straight. You can assume how somebody feels who you've never met. You can assume how my biological fucking mother felt, but I can't tell you how people I know personally felt about something.
I would like to talk to these people. Like that they were literally using abortion because because this is the same thing.
I can't stand talking about this. I can't fucking stand.
I can't stand people who say I'm pro-choice and then have a long list of reasons during which you shouldn't get an abortion.
Corinne.
And you're a bad
Because there's an adoption person. I have more of a fucking right to talk about this than you do.
I love that. Put that on a t-shirt. You're a fucking idiot. Goodbye.
Okay. Bye, Corinne.
Go fuck yourself.
Go fuck myself?
You're an idiot. You're a real idiot.
I'm an idiot?
Okay.
Go fuck myself. You're walking off the show.
Yeah, you're in a fucking ass.
You're walking off the show.
I am. You're a fucking baby, Joe. And the way you feel
What the fuck is wrong with
the way
you?
you feel about women is honestly disgusting. Okay.
Oh, fuck off, Corinne. Jesus Christ. Way to be a pro.
So they get all fired up, and Corinne gets impassioned and leaves the studio. And here's what I think in an argument like this, it kind of makes you look bad because these are the fights you're supposed to have. And it's bad to throw your podcast partner under the bus and say that his views on women are disgusting and kind of insinuate that he's a sexist. I think that was a rough look for Corinne because it kind of feels like she couldn't handle the argument, where I think if we're talking about the argument itself, I kind of agree with Corinne more. I think Joe is a little too personal because he was adopted. He takes the issue too personally. But when you get up and walk out, that kind of ruins everything that just happened. They just happened in the argument. And then once we get to Corinne leaving, it's very funny. You can tell Joe doesn't quite know what to do. And then he turns to the producers, one of whom, Alex Scarlato, who is on produces a few podcasts. Joe turns to her almost for reassurance. Not a great move because Alex was certainly on Team Corinne. So a rough fucking day for old No Shoulders Derosa. But I think it's definitely. So I was on their YouTube page to find this clip and everything. They only have the full podcast up. Shame on them, because that's the kind of podcast, like, you guys watching this might now think, let me check out this episode. That's something they should have put up. Maybe they put it on social media and everything. I didn't see it. But they should put that on YouTube, because that immediately gets people to watch the full episode. I don't know if I'll ever go back to Without a Country, but this might be worth checking out, I guess, if you're looking for something in the news world. And then one last thing in the news world of comedy before we get out of here. Leslie Jones, apparently, this was strange. So I guess Leslie Jones got Kevin Brennan, brother of Neil Brennan, banned from the Comedy Store. If you don't know, Neil Brennan, very funny guy, worked on Chappelle's show. Kevin Brennan, also a funny guy, older than Neil, got Neil into comedy, far less successful, which is why you know the name Neil Brennan and not necessarily Kevin Brennan. But Kevin Brennan has become known over the last few years for just trashing people relentless, including his brother. He goes after comics nonstop. He got into a physical altercation with Gary Gulman. He almost got into a physical altercation on this podcast with Jimmy Martinez. He's battled with Jim Norton and just Anthony Cumia, who he worked for, Artie Lang, he goes after a lot. Anyone he's involved with in comedy, he eventually takes shots at. Bill Burr, I think, went on his podcast to address some of the shots he's taken. So he's a shit stirrer, this Kevin Brennan. And I think he said something about Leslie Jones basically being loud and obnoxious, kind of. I did hear one clip on a podcast where he said that she could beat him up, basically. Leslie Jones is kind of sensitive to these issues, but in a weird move, she admitted this in a live stream recently. So I don't know if this happened a while ago and she just admitted it, or if it just recently happened. Seems like strange timing considering no one's at the Comedy Cellar right now. But regardless, for a comedian to get another comedian kicked out of the place where they work out their material and maybe make some of their money, that's pretty fucked up. If that's the world, I mean, that's why, I keep harping on these cancel culture issues, because I care about them, because you see the world going down a road where if you don't like someone, you're going to get them banned. You're going to get them kicked out. So that's what Leslie Jones did to Kevin Brennan. I think comedians should be more vocal against that. And even if you don't like Kevin Brennan because he's taking shots at you or someone you like, you should be defending him here, because that could happen to you. The wrong person complains about your jokes, Leslie Jones, then you're out on the street. Leslie Jones is supposed to be controversial, right? I guess she, has edgy material from what I understand. So someone could complain about her, right? Get her kicked out. Not a great look. And if that's what comedy's becoming, then I kind of understand why people are fleeing Los Angeles and people are very down on the stand-up world right now, because I imagine it's a scary time. It is for everyone, but the idea of live performing, not just sad. My passion here, drop the mic, may be useless. Hopefully we can still talk about podcasts, because the stand-up world is going to shit, it seems. So that's it. Just a few news topics I wanted to hit. Maybe we'll get back into our other bullshit reviews and all that kind of stuff next week. But until then, we will talk to you next time.